There's an interesting story. There's an interesting story. We all know that when the when the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away, where's the mic? When the previous Rebbe passed away, the Rebbe refused to become a Rebbe, as we know. Rabbi Dubov from Manchester happened to be in New York because his son Label got married on Thursday night, Mamish, the night before. He knew the Rebbe from Riga. When the previous Rebbe came from Russia in 1927, Peches was still 27, Rabbi Dubov lived in Riga. I have relatives who are his Eineklach. So one of them told me that when the previous Rebbe came out of Russia, he needed a job. He needed a job, push it. He needed a job. He didn't need a job for money. He needed a job to have a right to live. So Rabbi Dubov vacated his Rabbonis. He gave up his shul. So the Frierdiker had a job, he had a Rabbonis. The result of this, Rabbi Dubov moved to England. So it saved his life. When the Holocaust came, he was not in mainland Europe, he was in England. Rabbi Dubov saw the Rebbe then. The Rebbe was then 26 years old. And he right away understood that this is something else. So the Rebbe, the Levi, the Frierdiker passed away Shabbos. The Frierdiker passed away on Shabbos. The Levi was Sunday. Tuesday, the Rebbe already went. Remember, the Rebbe was not a oval. The Rebbe was a son-in-law. He had no obligation to sit shiva. The daughters had to sit shiva. The wife had to sit shiva. The Rebbe was not an oval. So Tuesday, which was the 13th day of Shvat, the Rebbe went to the first time to the resting place of the previous Rebbe. It was a mound of earth. There wasn't even a tombstone. There's photos of the Rebbe standing next to this mound of earth. Rabbi Dubov stood next to the Rebbe, and he waited for the Rebbe to finish what he had to do. And as soon as he finished, he said to the Rebbe, 3 days after the Rebbe passed, bis jetzt gewend der Rebbe, und it's zentir. Until now it was the previous Rebbe, and now it's your turn. And the Rebbe snapped back. The Rebbe leapt. The Rebbe is living. Like, don't even think about it. And there's all kinds of periods, evolution, you know. The Rebbe at some point actually threatened to run away. So I'll disappear. I'll run away from New York. You'll never find me. There's a whole bunch of steps in the story of how the Rebbe sort of reluctantly went from being a non-Rebbe to a Rebbe. And one of the big issues was, he said, the previous Rebbe never told me. It's actually a story of a Yid. A Jew went over to the Rebbe during that year and he suggested the Rebbe to be a Rebbe, so the Rebbe said, I was never told. So he tells the Rebbe, it's very hard for me to believe that you were never told. So he says to the Rebbe, you think I'm a liar? The Rebbe says to him, you think I'm a liar? So he gives the Rebbe a whole song and dance that the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, when his father had passed, he said he had no hayrah. And we found out later that before his bar mitzvah, as a 12-year-old, the Rebbe Marash told him that he's a Rebbe. So he says to our Rebbe, he was told before bar mitzvah is supposed to be a Rebbe. Then when his father passes away, he had no instructions. So he says in Yiddish, "Nu das von der Sachen, was man kann nicht verstehen." These are from those things what we can't make sense out of. And then he tells the Rebbe, Punkt, wie wir können das nicht verstehen, can man das nicht verstehen. But just so we don't understand what the Rebbe Rashab meant when he said he had no Eirah, when he clearly did. When the Rebbe says he wasn't told, it's one of those things we can't explain. And the Rebbe cracked up. He laughed. You know why? Because it was the simple truth of the matter. But there's a lot of little things that are fascinating. And one of them is the Rebbe kept a journal. Our Rebbe kept a journal. And the Rebbe's journal includes only his conversations with the previous Rebbe. And there are some things in that journal that are really extraordinary. And one of them is the following story. I'm saying it in light of what I said a few minutes ago. That one day, the Rebbe was by his father-in-law. The Frierdiker Rebbe was, I don't know if he was in Riga or in Poland. Remember, the Rebbe was not with the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe was in Germany and in France, and the previous Rebbe was in Latvia and in Poland. And part of the reason, a significant part of the reason was because the Latvian government and the Polish government did not give the Rebbe permission to live, because the Rebbe never applied for citizenship. The Frierdiker Rebbe came to Latvia, he applied for Latvian citizenship. It took him 5 years to become a citizen. As soon as he became a Latvian citizen, he moved to Poland, and it saved his life. Because when the war came, on his door, I heard it from a Yid who saw it with his eyes, Rabbi Garfinkel, on the door of the Rebbe's apartment, it said the people living here are Latvian citizens. So the Germans who occupied Poland are quote-unquote respected governments. But the Rebbe never even tried. The Rebbe was a Russian citizen until he came to America. He had a Russian passport, which made life very difficult for him. The only way to get around going back to Russia was being in school, which is a significant part of the reason that he had to be in Berlin and then in Paris. But he would visit the Frierdiker Rebbe as often as he could, showed the Polish government at some point didn't let him in. 38 and 39, he couldn't even come for Pesach. The Polish government would not let Rebbe visit his Shvat for Pesach. The Frierdiker Rebbe used to send him matzahs and wine because they didn't let him into Poland for come to his father for Pesach. I can't understand the Nanishkeit Shebedava, but that's the Metzias. That's the fact. 38 and 39, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin had Pesach in Paris because they wouldn't let him into Poland. So he was once visiting the previous Rebbe, and the previous Rebbe calls him in and tells him in Yiddish, considering the dream I had last night, you should shtel mashke, you should put make a Farbrengen. And he tells the Rebbe the following: I was sleeping, the previous Rebbe tells, I was sleeping, and I saw my father, the Rebbe Rashab. And my father asked me, Favos bestu azay umedik, why are you so sad? As badir in shtub is lichtig banacht. When in your home at night, it's like day, there's light. This is what the previous Rebbe dreamt. He says, I opened my eyes and the moon is shining through the window. That's what he tells the Rebbe. And I knew that my father wasn't talking about the moon. So I got up and I went through the house. And everyone was sleeping. I walked into the Cheder HaSfarim, my library, the Rebbe had his books. And the Rebbe was sitting and learning. Our Rebbe was sitting and learning. So the previous Rebbe understood that when his father said to him, Badin in Shtub is lichtig banacht, he was referring to the fact that the Rebbe wasn't sleeping. So he tells this to the Rebbe. And then he says to the Rebbe, Kush mich, kiss me. So the Rebbe reaches down to kiss the previous Rebbe's hand. And the Rebbe points at his forehead. He wanted to kiss him on the head. So the Rebbe did. The Rebbe writes the story. But it's written so humbly, you think it's talking about somebody else. Now if you wanted to interpret the story, what's the difference between kissing somebody on the hand and kissing somebody on the forehead? When you kiss somebody on the hand, you're kissing what they do, what they give, what they could give, what makes them function. When you kiss somebody on the forehead doesn't represent a particular action. It represents the person. And this is the same idea that I spoke about before, that the face of the person shows you nothing about the person, and it shows you everything about the person. And I'm sure there's deep significance to the fact, first of all, that the Rebbe wanted to kiss the Rebbe's hand. Obviously, he was very uncomfortable kissing his father-in-law any place, let alone on the forehead. But the Rebbe said, no, I want you to kiss me. Kiss me on my metach, on my forehead, on my ponim. There was a Yid in New York whose name was Rabbi Mordechai Mentlik. Rabbi Mentlik. I mean, those of us who are old remember Rabbi Mentlik. Remember Rabbi Mentlik. Rabbi Mentlik, when we knew him, he moved very slowly, he spoke very slowly, and he came across like as if everything about him was very, very slow. You felt like he's not so sharp. But it was a great cover, because Rabbi Mentlik was so sharp, you have no idea how sharp he was. Rabbi Mentlik was 10 steps ahead of you. When he had a conversation with you and you thought you were fooling him, he was spinning a web, you didn't figure out till much later that you were trapped, He was incredibly sharp. But his chitzonius, he moved very slowly, because the story was that he used to talk so fast. He talked as fast as his brain worked. People couldn't understand what he was saying. So the previous Rebbe told him he should speak very slowly. So he spoke very slowly. But he spoke so slowly, you were under the impression that he was slow. But there was nothing slow about him. He was a really sharp man, really sharp. And Rabbi Yael Khan, the Rebbe's Chayzer, who's now passed away, this is a conversation for a different time. I don't know if people fully appreciate how important the Rabbi Yael is. The Rebbe had so many things to do. And the last thing the Rebbe had to worry about was what he spoke about, his Torah. this one man, this Abiel Khan, this one boy, he was 20 years old when he showed up, is responsible for so much of the Torah that we have. You take an Abiel out of Lubavitch, I say you can reduce the Rebbe's Torah by a fraction of 10. Mamish. He's the schus that he has and the debt we feel we have to him because of the amount. The Rebbe spoke. Never looked it over. But Rabbi wrote it down, and that's how it stayed for the first 20, 30 years. Much later, the Rebbe got around to editing his sichos. Rabbi was a boy of 20, and he was also very intelligent, he was very smart, very, very sharp. And he was also quite savvy. At Verstanden Political, so he understood personalities and people and egos. He wasn't a flat academic. He understood people very well. He showed up in New York. He was on the ship when the Rebbe passed away, and they didn't tell him. They left the port on Sunday Yud Aleph Shvat. The Chassidim in Eretz Yisrael made the decision to let them go. Now they should have taken him off the ship. They let him go to the Rebbe. He arrived a couple of weeks after this Talkus. He actually asked the Rebbe about the possibility of going back because he came to see the previous Rebbe, and the previous Rebbe passed away. So the Rebbe told him, the Rebbe de Shvat doch gewusst was wird sein. The previous Rebbe knew what was going to happen, and you need to understand the implications of these words. The Gemara says, and it's in the last Pedic, in Pedic K, in chapter 5 in Basi Lagani, the previous Rebbe brings it, that a person doesn't know Ita V'Ragov, nobody knows his time. The Gemara says, David HaMelech asked Hashem, Hodiyeni Hashem Kitzi, tell me my time, and Hashem says, nobody knows their time. Nobody knows their time. But the Rebbe says that Rabbeim knew everything. They knew their time also. So the Rebbe said, the Rebbe de Shvet, the previous Rebbe knew that this was his time, and he told you to come. So that's a raya that you should stay. So Rabbi El stayed. He stayed. And he started to take landscape, try to figure out what's going on, There was the Rashag, there was the Rebbe, there were all kinds of people. These people sided with this one. He figured it out pretty quick. Rabbi El was very smart. He also was very chassidish. Rabbi El Khan was a very humble man, you should know. If you understand how smart he should have had such a big ego when he walked into a room. There would be no room for anybody else. He was humble. Rabbi El did not take up a lot of space. And he watched Rabbi Mentlik. This Rabbi Mentlik. Rabbi Mentlik was a chassid of the Rebbe before the grave was closed. As soon as the Rebbe passed, the Fidik is chassid. But Rabbi Yael understood that Rabbi Mentlik is a smart man. And he wasn't the kind of person who was easily impressed. So we asked Rabbi Mentlik, how did you become a chassid so fast? It takes a little time. How did you become a chassid so fast? And Rabbi Mentlik said, he spoke in Yiddish, if you would have seen how the Rebbe looked at him, you would also. If you had seen how the previous Rebbe would look at our Rebbe when he would walk in, you would also be a chassid. The way the previous Rebbe appreciated the Rebbe was extraordinary. And there's a lot of little details, stories. One of the interesting facts that we know is that in the months prior to the Frierdiker Rebbe's passing, quite a few, I don't know how many, 15, 10, 15, a lot of people who were important to Lubavitch were in the previous Rebbe's room. They were in the Frierdiker Rebbe's cheder, Yechidus, and all of a sudden the previous Rebbe would start talking about the Rebbe. The last few months. And he would talk about the Rebbe in great praise. And they couldn't understand why the Rebbe is doing this. The previous Rebbe never talked about that Rebbe. All of a sudden he's talking about him in such flowering terms. And when the Rebbe passed, they understood that the previous Rebbe was telling them that they should understand that there's really no question about who the Rebbe is supposed to be. And one of the stories that's told about that year, about that period is, I can't promise you that every story is true. I can just promise every story I didn't make up. If it isn't true, I'm just repeating. The stories that I tell, I heard or I read. That Rabbi Kazanovsky was a very important chassid. Was a very, very important chassid in our generations here in America. He did incredible things for the Rebbe. Rabbi Kazanovsky had a dream on Chavdalah Tevis, which is about 16 days before Yud Shvat, 2 weeks before Yud Shvat, when the Rebbe officially took the job. And in his dream, he sees a Farbrengen by the Frierdiker Rebbe in the previous Rebbe's apartment on the second floor. And the previous Rebbe in the dream turns to Rabbi Kazanovsky and he says to him, why does everybody look so miserable? Why is everybody so unhappy? So Rebbe Kaz says, why are you so unhappy? Because you left us. You abandoned us. You left us. So the Rebbe says, but I left you my son-in-law, and says the Rebbe's name. So Rebbe Kazanovsky tells the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, but he keeps on saying, you're still the Rebbe. But you're still the Rebbe. So in the dream, the previous Rebbe turns to our Rebbe, and he says to him from Pachas Shalach, I'll say it in Hebrew and Yiddish, I'll translate it into English. Ma titzak Eloi. Favos schreist du wegen des Kashrus zu mir. David abnei Yisrael v'Yisou. Zog chsidis für Yidden, weil sie fordern an kegen gehen Mashiach. In English he says, why do you keep on speaking about the people being connected to me? Speak chsidis to Chassidim, and they'll go and greet Mashiach. So Kazanovsky got up in the morning the next day. He ran to 770. And he came over to the Rebbe with this basura. He had this incredible dream. And as was common for the Rebbe, after he finished telling him the whole thing, the Rebbe asked him to say it again. The Rebbe wanted to process it. And when he finished telling the story the second time, the Rebbe said, nah, that's not a real dream. So the Rebbe says, why, you don't like it? He says, no, because if it was a real dream, I would have had the same dream and I didn't have it. If it would have been a real dream, I would also have the dream. And I didn't have the dream, so you must have been thinking about it. It's one of the many stories. The end of the story is, and this is really the truth, the end of the story is, again, I wasn't born yet. None of us, nobody was. I don't think there's anybody here who was certainly not of age to remember this process. It's 75 years. Shvat is 75 years ago. It's a lifetime ago. There was a real concern by the Elder Chassidim whether the Rebbe would accept it. He says, I Farbrengen last night, and I said this, that the Chassidim were really afraid that the Rebbe would not agree to be Rebbe. So next to me was sitting Rabbi Edelman, the son of Rabbi David Edelman. He's a Rav in a shul here someplace. So he taps me on the shoulder, and he says, my father used to call it revisionist history. He said, it's not true. The day after the Fiedeke passed away, the Rebbe was my Rebbe. He was a shliach already. I was consulting him and he would answer me like a Rebbe. And he was like bothering me that I was telling all of this whole drama. He says, the Rebbe was the Rebbe the minute the Fiedeke passed away. Oh. He says he doesn't care one bit about football. Ariel, your seat's right here. My hat is keeping it warm. Okay, I'll have to hit him. Okay, I'll get to you later. He said to me, Rabbi Edelman said to me, my father told me the day the Rebbe passed, he was the Rebbe. So I was trapped, you know what I'm saying? I'm sitting at a Farbrengen, I'm making a whole speech, and this Rabbi Edelman is ruining my speech. So I told him what my grandfather told me. My Zaydi Schusterman, all of us Shalom, said to me that he had a Rav from the old country. His name was Rabbi Benyaminson, Rabbi Chmiel Benyaminson. He passed away in 1954. He was an elder chassid. He lived in Canada, and he came to New York for Chayelo that year. And he went to the Oyel, and he rode a pigeon. He went into the Rebbe, our Rebbe, and he said to the Rebbe, in Yiddish, of course, he says, us old chavre, you know, the old guys who learned to Lubavitch, we'll figure it out. But what's going to be with the young, the kids? And the Rebbe answered, from the Junge habe ich sich came on the Shabbat gesagt. I never told the young no. I never told the young no. From the first day, I never told the young no. That's what the Rebbe said. But the fact is that on some level, there was a real concern about what was going to be. And the Rebbe accepted the Nesius. There was a Farbrengen. I'm sure you were aware that the Farbrengen was scheduled for 8:30. And Bechlal, anybody who knows the Rebbe knew that you could set your clock by the Rebbe. My brother and I, we were children. We would literally look at the clock. The Rebbe walked in 1:30 exactly to Farbrengen. And if it was 1:29 or 1:31, the clock needed a battery change. The Rebbe was so prompt with times, always. Mamish to the minute. In the Letzte Pariyah, the last few years, the Rebbe wasn't so precise. But that's when we were growing up, we would literally, it was part of the game, was to see if the Rebbe was going to come on time. 10 o'clock was not 10:01, it was not 9:59, it was 10 o'clock exactly. It was remarkable how precise the Rebbe was. The first Farbrengen, the Rebbe showed up 50 minutes late, 50 minutes. It was called for 8:30, showed up 9:20. Where was he? He went to see his mother. And wouldn't you want to be a fly on the wall over here, that guy. I don't think the Rebbe went to see his mother and said, Mommy, I'm afraid. I don't think that that's what happened. The Rebbe's mother was living in New York. And I want to say this parenthetically. The Rebbe's mother kept a journal. The Rebbe's mother kept a journal. And they published the journal. It's printed. And from the moment the previous Rebbe passes away, until the moment the Rebbe becomes Rebbe, there is zero mention, none, of all the nonsense going on. The politics and the two teams and all the shtusim. There's zero mention of anything. She talks about her son the way she talked about him before. She talks about him after. After the Rebbe becomes Rebbe, she frequently writes in her journal, there's only one person in the world who understands me, but I cannot burden him because he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. She says this a few times in her journal, from the year 1950 till 1964. But the Rebbe's mother was here, and her husband, the Rebbe Leivik, had said many years before that the Rebbe was going to be the next Rebbe. So whatever they discussed, it was probably kind of important. The Rebbe made people wait for 50 minutes. The Rebbe Farbrengen, and of course the highlight of the Farbrengen was the Maimer. I'm sure you've heard the stories. There was an old chassid, his name was Sender Nemtsov, Avraham Sender Nemtsov. He was the father-in-law of the Rebbe's secretary, we call him Rabbi Dr. Nissen Mendel, Rabbi Nissen Mendel. He was his shver, he was his father-in-law. And he lived also in Manchester, England. He moved to New York in that interim year. When the Rebbe passed, when the Frierdiker passed, he was living in England, and he moved to New York. And he was a senior chassid. And he was a serious man, he was a deep person. And in the middle of the Farbrengen, he got up on the table. The place was packed, he couldn't move. He got up on the table, and he said, the sichas are wonderful. The sichas are wonderful. But the chassidim want a maimer. Nim tzachei, the Rebbe should be kind and say a maimer chassidus, which he hadn't done. So the Rebbe smiled and told him to sit down. And he opened up, he had in front of him the maimer, the Basel guy, the pamphlets called Kuntras Ayin Dalet. The previous Rebbe has pamphlets of chassidus, which were numbered. And it goes up like 112, because the Rebbe kept on printing them after the previous Rebbe passed. The Basel Legani is Kuntras Ayin pamphlet 74. He opened it up, and he started reading inside. He said that the maimer that the previous Rebbe came out for his Histalkos Elul, he begins Basel Legani. He started reading inside. Basel Legani Chizikala. And you can hear in the tape, the Rebbe says those words, and you can hear people screaming, stand up, everybody should get up. And when the Rebbe starts saying the maimer, every sentence he pauses and he breathes heavily. You could see that it's hard for him. But as the maimer progresses, it gets easier, and the maimer begins to sort of fall out of him, cascade out. It gets easier and easier for the Rebbe to say the maimer. And after like 15 minutes, he stopped. The Rebbe stopped twice in the middle of the maimer. And each time he stopped, they sang the Gurim of two Rebbes, because in that first maimer, the Rebbe mentioned each one of the Rebbes 5 times. From the Alter Rebbe till the Rebbe Rashab. He did not include the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid the first year, only the second year. He said 2 Toiros from each Rebbe. He told a story from each Rebbe. He mentioned their names, and we sang a niggin from each Rebbe. But as soon as the Rebbe paused, Sender Nemtsov popped back up on the table. He was very excited. And he said to the assembled that Chassidim have to thank God that they have a Rebbe. And he said, Shechayonu b'Shem HaMalchus. He said, Shechayonu with Hashem's name. And everybody said, Amen. And the Rebbe smiled and asked him to sit down again. The Rebbe said the maimer. And of course, after the maimer, the Rebbe said that famous Sikhe, which begins with the words, Itzer Hetz Chayin Yid. Now listen to me, people. That Sikhe was spoken in the tune of a maimer. It wasn't said like a Sikhe, it was said like a maimer. And he basically said, if anybody thinks not that you got a Rebbe, you can go back to sleep, you picked the wrong Rebbe. What's going to happen now is everybody is going to be put to work. I'll help you, but you're going to have to work. I was at a Farbrengen last night where somebody related that the Rebbe's brother Label, Yisrael Leib, was living in Israel when the previous Rebbe passed. And he showed up one day in the Lubavitcher Shul, Nachas Ben Yamin, and he says to the Lubavitcher, he says, I know, the next Rebbe is my brother. And I know my brother. If you think you're working hard, you ain't seen nothing yet. My brother's going to make you work like you never worked in your life. And that's exactly what happened. It's exactly, he had to leave Israel. He moved to England before the year was out. In that middle year. And he came to them, Nochem Gosh, went to few Chassidim. And he said, listen, I'm leaving. You have to make sure, you have to promise me you're going to do everything in your power that my brother should be a Rebbe. My brother has to be a Rebbe. And that's how it was. But what I want to say is that the Rebbe walked out about 12:30. Farbrengen was about 3 hours. And again, I wasn't born yet, so I obviously don't remember it. But the way it's described is you had men in their 80s, old people, jumping up and down like school children. They were so happy. The fact that the Rebbe took the job, which had been a concern, was so exciting to Chassidim. They didn't know what to do. It was just, the mood was extraordinary. And it's an interesting thing. It's a very interesting thing. We're sitting here 75 years later. And all of us, none of us are fools. We all understand the situation that we're in. Now you have already a generation and a half. Not children, you have already a generation and a half. The children of children who never saw the Rebbe. Explain it how you wish. The kids struggle. The kids struggle. The kids ask questions. The kids give their teachers a hard time. I know, I'm one of the teachers. But they figure it out. Somehow, they develop not a formal sense of a relationship with the Rebbe, but a personal sense of a relationship with the Rebbe, an intimate sense of anybody who's a Lubavitcher knows that Lubavitch looks like a big mass of Michiganers running after some rabbi screaming. That's how it looks. But if you're on the inside, you know how individual it is. You know how personal it is. You know the extent to which the Rebbe knows each one, and the Rebbe has a different relationship with each one. Some people, that relationship was developed through long conversations. Some people, that relationship developed through a few words. Some people, that relationship was just the Rebbe's eyes. And some people, that relationship is they never saw him. But his kashrus and chassidus really is very individual. It's very personal. When you're a little kid, you know, you don't really have a choice. You know, if you're born a Lubavitcher. I remember being in yeshiva, and you know, every single Farbrengen was the same topic. Rebbe, 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 Rebbe. And you were not allowed to say it, because if you would say it, they'd lynch you, but you would think it, you know. Well, wait a minute. When did I sign on for this? There's a Rebbe, I'm his chassid. When did that happen? What do you mean? You're Lubavitcher. Yeah, I was born here. And it takes a while for each person to realize that even though the indoctrination, the rearing sort of gives you no space to actually think about this, but at some point you figure out that this is a personal challenge. Every boy and girl, every man and woman, I teach yeshiva bacharim, I teach yeshiva girls, all born after Gimel Tammuz. Their parents were children by Gimel Tammuz. Their parents have, at best, child memories of the Rebbe in many cases. But they all understand, at least many of them, that this is an earnest thing. It's not belonging to a political party. This is not, you know, I'm part of, which team should I say, the Chiefs or the Eagles? Who's winning at the moment, huh? The Eagles. So it's not belonging to a team. This is very real. The Rebbe Chassid relationship is personal. And the kids figure it out. So many of them, it's remarkable. And what we know, adults know, and we try to teach this to the kids, and it helps the kids make sense out of his kashrus. When you speak to children who never saw the Rebbe, and they really want to understand how this has anything to do with them, and they're very correct in having that argument, is they realize that Chassidus and his kashrus doesn't begin until you do something. The Rebbe is not going to do anything for us. We're going to do something for the Rebbe. That doesn't seem fair. What do you mean? He's the Rebbe, I'm just one of the guys, why should I do something for him? And the answer is because it's a deep relationship. Deep relationships are about giving. And Chassidim give. And in giving they get. In giving they get. I know this from my own self. Everybody's got stories with the Rebbe. You know, stories, miracle stories, dream stories. Everybody's got stories with the Rebbe. My stories with the Rebbe, personally, are in my teaching. I'll teach a class, and I'll finish the class, and I'll say, I did not give that class. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens from time. This class I didn't give. I don't know where the words came from. In other words, in the things that you do for the Rebbe, you experience the Rebbe's connection to us. And the kids figure that out, and they develop really what is the ultimate definition of a chassid, that they do it with joy, that they're happy to be a Lubavitcher Chassidim. So this is the anniversary, this is the day of his kashrus. And I remember after Gimel Tammuz, 33 and a half years ago, Reb Zalman got out to get up in 770 by the Shloshim. And he spoke like an old Russian chassid. He was an old Russian chassid. And he spoke like an old Russian chassid. He says, "V'ramalim ol gewusst as kashes einen klippe." That's all he said. We always knew that questions are klippe. In other words, you don't need an answer, you need to not ask. Kashes einen klippe. That was, it's Chassidim used to say kashes einen klippe, but that's a very big question. What do you mean kash? I can't ask a question. It takes developing a little emunah to see in retrospect that when you ask a question and you get an answer, the answer doesn't answer the question. Because the question is coming from the heart, the answer is giving to the mind. It's not the same language. You develop his kashrus by getting past that. So l'chaim l'vracha, each one of us should have our kashrus to the Rebbe, and it should be b'simcha. And it's only going to be b'simcha if we deliver. Each person in his own way. All of us have different missions. Everyone has a mission. Whether you go to the convention or you don't go to the convention, if you're a Lubavitcher chassid, who's not just a descendant of Lubavitcher Chassidim, but is in fact a chassid of the Rebbe, all of us have a mandate. We all have a job to do, big or little, but they're all very, very important. And in doing this job, we have a relationship with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is a good Rebbe. He should give us all the brachas, and they should manifest, first of all, in health. In health for us and for our spouses and for all of our children. Physical health, psychological health, spiritual health. And we should use this health to acquire a little wisdom and to live a life that's of a higher value, which is exactly what the Rebbe wants. And as the Rebbe said, we should collectively do our little pieces and bring Mashiach Tzidkenu. L'chaim, 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 l'chaim.